They told me Christmas was for family, until my own son told me I wasn't set invited. It was a Wednesday in mid-December, Cleveland buried under snow. I'd called just to ask what I should bring for Christmas dinner. A pie, a casserole, anything. Instead, my son's words cut through the line like ice. "Dad, we weren't expecting you this year," he said. His tone wasn't hesitant. It was firm, practiced. I swallowed, confused. "What do you mean, not expecting me?" He sighed, the kind of sigh that says you've already had this conversation in your head. "Look, Dad, it's better if you stay home. The kids are older now. We want to do Christmas our way. You should relax at your place." Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "It's really our Christmas now." My grip on the counter tightened. My own son had just demoted me from family to outsider. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. I hung up, my hand trembling as I set the phone down. The kitchen hummed with silence. Somewhere outside, a snowplow scraped the street, steady and uncaring. But all I could hear were his words, "Our Christmas now." I poured myself coffee I didn't want and wandered into the living room. That's when I saw it, a half-crumpled envelope sitting on the side table, tossed there days ago with the junk mail. I pulled it closer and flattened it. A mortgage bill, due January 3rd, $1,780. I stared at the number until it blurred. For 2 years I'd been covering those payments, my pension, my savings, my late wife's careful budgeting. Every dollar I put in kept his family warm and dry. And now, I wasn't welcome at the table that house sheltered. That's when it hit me. He didn't want me as part of the family. He just wanted my money. I sat heavily on the couch. The bill still in my hand. It felt heavier than paper. It felt like betrayal printed in ink. Memories washed over me. Christmas mornings where I built fires at dawn, so the kids would wake to warmth. Stockings his mother had hung by hand. The smell of her gingerbread filling the house. Every nail I hammered into that place, every shift I took in the dead of winter was for him. And now he had the gall to tell me to stay home. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the old furnace rattling like bones. My wife Sip's photo sat on the dresser, her smile frozen in a red Christmas sweater from years ago. I whispered into the dark, "What would you say to him if you were here?" The silence pressed down heavier than the snow outside. The next morning I went through the motions. Coffee, oatmeal, shoveling the drive. But my chest still burned. Later that day I drove into town for gloves and road salt. On the way back I slowed as I passed his house. The lights twinkled on the porch. A wreath hung neatly on the door. Through the front window I saw my grandkids circling the tree, their laughter spilling out even through the glass. My daughter-in-law carried a tray of cookies to the table. It looked like a postcard, perfect, warm, complete. Except I wasn't that invited. My grip on the steering wheel turned my knuckles white. I thought about parking, knocking, demanding answers, but I didn't. I kept driving, the snow hissing under my tires. Back home, I opened the drawer in my desk where I keep my records. I spread the papers out, mortgage slips, bank receipts, all in my name. $1,820 in November, $1,780 in October, over and over again. His life, his house, his stability, balanced on my shoulders. I picked up the most recent slip, December 1st, $1,780, and underlined the date twice with a pen. My hand shook, but not from weakness, from anger. It dawned on me. I was the foundation he stood on, and he just tried to kick me out of my own creation. Without me, nothing held. Not the roof, not the house, not his prideful little life. I folded the mortgage bill, slid it into my coat pocket, and walked back to the window. The snow swirled under the streetlights, blurry and cold. My reflection stared back at me, lines on my face carved deeper now, not from age but from betrayal. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't just feel old, I felt dangerous. If my son thought he could erase me from Christmas while still cashing the checks that kept his lights on, then he had another thing coming. I whispered into the glass, my breath fogging the pain. Not this time. After that phone call, December seemed to grow colder by the hour. The snow piled higher on the streets of Cleveland, but it couldn't bury the ache in my chest. I spent the next morning in silence, moving through the house like a ghost. The walls echoed with memories I didn't want to revisit. Christmas mornings when the kids were small, when my wife was still alive. She used to hang stockings by the fireplace, embroidered with each of our names. Mine always said Dad in bright red thread. Now the mantel was bare, and my name might as well have been erased. I couldn't eat. Oatmeal sat cold in the bowl as I wandered from room to room, carrying the mortgage bill like a piece of evidence I couldn't put down. Every time I looked at that $1,780 due in January, the truth cut deeper. I wasn't just excluded, I was discarded. Nights were the worst. The furnace rattled and the wind howled against the windows, but the silence inside was heavier. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening for a voice that would never come. My wife's picture on the dresser seemed to look back at me with quiet sadness. She'd been gone 5 years, but in that moment the loss felt fresh. Why did we work so hard for him? I whispered into the dark. Why did we save? Why did we build, if this is where it ends? My hand trembled as I opened the drawer of my nightstand. Inside was a bundle of receipts and slips, years of proof that I had carried my son when he couldn't carry himself. I spread them across the bed like cards, the dates and amounts staring back. November 1st, $1,820. October 1st, $1,780. Month after month, my handwriting scrawled on every line. Each slip felt like a scar, proof of a loyalty that had been taken for granted. I pressed my palm against one, as if I could press the hurt away, but it only grew. For 3 nights in a row, I barely slept. I found myself wandering the kitchen at 2 a.m., staring at the refrigerator, the ticking clock, the shadows of my empty house. I poured whiskey into a coffee mug, something I hadn't done since my wife's funeral. It burned going down, but it didn't warm me. On the 4th night, something shifted. I had pulled out the Christmas photo albums, maybe out of masochism. There we were, me in my work shirt, still dusty from the construction site, my wife in her red sweater, holding our boy on her lap. Behind us the house looked small but proud, the paint fresh, the roof new. I remembered how I'd taken extra jobs, patching other people's roofs in the biting cold, just to make sure ours stayed solid. And now my son wanted me to stay home, while he celebrated under the roof my money paid for. That thought cracked something open inside me. At first it was grief, then it hardened into something else. Anger. By December 18th, a Sunday, I finally left the house with purpose. I drove to the grocery store, more to escape the silence than to shop. I picked up milk, bread, a carton of eggs, and that's when it happened. In the next aisle, I heard his voice. My son. I froze, heart hammering. He was talking to someone on the phone, loud enough that I couldn't help but hear. "Dad Sep's old," he said. "He won Sep be around forever. Once he Sep's gone, the house is mine." The words hit me harder than the wind outside. I ducked behind a shelf of cereal boxes, every muscle tense, listening as he laughed lightly. "Yeah, it's Sep's just a matter of time. He's Sep's still paying, but once it's Sep's over, everything's Sep's set." I gripped the cart so tight my knuckles went white. I wanted to march around the aisle and confront him right there, but I didn't. I stood in the shadow of a Frosted Flakes display, letting his words carve themselves into me. When he walked past moments later, he didn't even notice me. He just strolled out, whistling, like the world was his. I stood there for a long time, staring at the boxes, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. That night, back home, I spread out the receipts again. But this time, I didn't see them as scars. I saw them as weapons, proof, evidence. My grief hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed. I wasn't a ghost in my own house anymore. I was a man with fire in his chest. I whispered to the empty living room. "If you think I'm old and powerless, you are about to learn just how wrong you are." The mortgage bill sat on the table, glowing under the lamp. It no longer looked like a burden. It looked like a key. And I decided then, if my son wanted a Christmas without me, then he'd get one. But it wouldn't be the way he imagined. By the time the calendar hit December 19th, I wasn't just grieving anymore. I was planning. The pain had hardened into something sharper, something that made my hands steady instead of trembling. That morning, I pulled on my heavy coat, tucked the mortgage bill into the inside pocket, and drove downtown to a brick building I hadn't stepped into in years, Halperin and Associates, my old lawyer's office. The receptionist recognized me, or maybe just the look in my eyes. "Mr. Walker," she said softly, "he can see you now." Inside, the air smelled of leather chairs and strong coffee. My lawyer, Mr. Halperin, was older than me, but sharper than ever. His gray suit was neat, his eyes as quick as they'd been when he helped me settle my wife's estate. "What brings you in before Christmas?" he asked, leaning back. I laid the mortgage bill on his desk. "Tell me what happens if I stop paying." He raised his eyebrows. "Stop paying? You've been carrying this note for years." "I know," I said, my voice steady. "But it sets not mine alone, it sets in both our names. My son sets in mine. What happens if I walk away?" Halperin steepled his fingers, thinking. Then he nodded slowly. "Without your contribution, foreclosure proceedings would begin. The bank would issue a notice within 30 days. Unless your son pays in full, he could lose the house." The words sent a quiet thrill through me. For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight shift off my shoulders. I leaned forward. "So the house stands on my payments." "That's Sip's right," Halperin confirmed. "Without you, nothing holds." I left his office with the paperwork tucked neatly in a folder, the cold wind biting my face as I walked back to the truck. My boots crunched against the ice, but I felt taller than I had in months. On the way home, I stopped at the grocery store. I wasn't hungry. I wasn't shopping. I just wanted to see if lightning would strike twice. Sure enough, it did. As I turned down the frozen foods aisle, I heard his voice again. My son. He was talking to a buddy this time, his tone cocky and careless. "Dad's paying the mortgage," he said. "Always has, always will. The old man Sep's too soft to quit." His friend laughed, and my son laughed too, loud enough for the whole aisle to hear. I stood frozen by the freezer doors, pretending to study a bag of peas, my heart pounding. Those words weren't just betrayal. They were proof. He was banking on me, never finding a spine. When I got home, I pulled out a yellow legal pad and started writing. Dates, amounts, payments. November 1st, $1,820. December 1st, $1,780. Next to each, I wrote one word in bold letters. M.E. The receipts stopped being pieces of paper. They became ammunition. That night, I couldn't sleep again. But this time, it wasn't grief keeping me up. It was strategy. I started taking photos of each receipt with my phone, one by one, creating a digital record. I even snapped a picture of the mortgage bill itself. The due date circled in red ink, January 3rd. By the next morning, I had a folder on my desk labeled simply, Proof. On December 21st, 2 days before Christmas Eve, I met my daughter-in-law at a coffee shop downtown. She'd called to check on me, maybe out of guilt. I decided to test the waters. "How are the kids?" I asked. She smiled nervously. "They sipped her good. Excited for Christmas." Then her smile faltered. "Look, I sip him sorry about, he just wants things his way." I nodded slowly. "Does he?" She hesitated, stirring her latte. Then she slipped. "He told the neighbors the house is already his, that it sips just a matter of time." My stomach tightened, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Already his?" She bit her lip, realizing too late what she said. "No," I interrupted gently. "You said enough." When I left the cafe, I had all the confirmation I needed. He wasn't just cutting me out of Christmas. He was cutting me out of my own house. That night, back at my desk, I looked at the folder labeled Proof and whispered to myself, if it's Seth's war he wants, war is what he Seth'll get. I took out the spare key to his house, the one he'd given me years ago in case of emergencies. I rolled it in my palm, feeling its sharp edges bite into my skin. An idea began to take shape. For now, I kept it tucked in my pocket. The time wasn't right yet, but soon. By December 22nd, I had a plan forming in my head. It wasn't fully built, but the foundation was set. Every bill, every receipt, every overheard word, they weren't just reminders of betrayal anymore. They were bricks, and I was laying them one by one, building something stronger than grief. Revenge! And the best part, I wouldn't have to raise my voice or my fists. All I had to do was stop paying, stop protecting, stop carrying a man who thought he was too good to set a place at the table for me. I closed my eyes that night with a strange calm. For the first time in weeks, I slept. But when I woke the next morning, the anger returned. Sharper than before. This time, though, it came with direction. My son had no idea what was coming. December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas. The city was buzzing with last-minute shoppers, but I wasn't thinking about gifts or decorations. I was thinking about keys. I still had mine, the emergency spare my son had given me years ago. For months it had sat forgotten in a small dish by my front door, tossed among loose screws and old nails. But now it felt like a weapon, cold, solid, sharp at the edges. That evening I drove to his neighborhood. The snowplows had cleared the main roads, but his street was still covered in white. My truck crunched over the ice as I parked 3 houses down, engine idling for a moment. I could see through his windows, lights glowing, laughter spilling out, the kind of picture-perfect holiday scene you'd see on a card. He didn't know I was coming. He didn't know that every laugh, every flicker of warmth inside that house was built on my pension checks. When I knocked, my daughter-in-law answered. "Oh, hi, Dad," she said, startled. She looked over her shoulder, probably wondering if she should let me in. "I won't stay long," I said smoothly, holding up a tin of cookies I bought at the store. "Just thought I drop these off for the kids." She hesitated, then opened the door. The smell of roasted ham and cinnamon drifted out. My son was in the living room, beer in hand, laughing with a couple of his buddies. He barely glanced up when I walked in. "Hey," he muttered, like I was a delivery man. Then he went back to his story. I forced a smile, placed the cookies on the counter, and chatted with my grandkids for a few minutes. They hugged me, their innocence making the sting cut deeper. All the while I kept my eyes on the bowl near the door, the one where they tossed their keys when they came home. And there it was. My old spare key still on its worn brass ring, sitting among the others. I hadn't touched it in years, until tonight. When no one was looking, I slid my hand into the bowl and palmed the key, smooth, practiced. My son's laughter carried from the living room, masking the soft clink of metal. I slipped the key into my coat pocket and said my goodbyes. On the drive home, I pulled into a darkened gas station and sat with the engine off, the key in my hand. I turned it over in the dim light, the brass catching the glow from the overhead lamp. It felt heavier than it should. Not just a piece of metal, an entry point into his secrets. The next night, December 24th, while families gathered for Christmas Eve, I prepared for something else. I dressed in my heaviest coat, gloves, and boots. The streets were quiet, blanketed in snow. At 9 p.m., I parked a block away and walked to his house, the spare key burning in my pocket. The neighborhood was alive with holiday cheer. Lights twinkled, music drifted faintly from open windows, but his house was silent. They'd gone to her parents' place for the night. I knew because I'd overheard my daughter-in-law mention it at the coffee shop. I approached the side door, heart hammering. The key slid into the lock, as if it had been waiting for me. One twist, and I was inside. The house smelled of pine and cinnamon, faint even in the emptiness. I moved quietly, my boots sinking into the plush carpet. I passed the tree in the living room, gifts piled high beneath it, boxes wrapped in glossy paper, boughs shining, all bought with money he didn't earn. But I wasn't here for presents. I was here for proof. Upstairs, in his study, I found it. The desk light was off, but moonlight through the curtains was enough. Papers scattered across the surface, receipts, statements, and right in the middle, a bank slip. I picked it up, my pulse quickening. A purchase for $4,500, dated December 14th, jewelry store. The item line was vague, but the price spoke louder than words, a gold watch. While he told me to stay home for Christmas, he was blowing thousands on himself with my money. I snapped a picture of the slip with my phone, making sure the date and amount were clear. Then I carefully slid the slip back into place. My hands shook, not from nerves, but from anger sharpened into resolve. I looked around the room, memorizing the scene. The desk, the chair, the piles of unpaid bills pushed to the side. His arrogance was written all over this room. Before I left, I paused by the door, the house silent around me. I whispered into the dark, "Merry Christmas, son." Then I walked out, locking the door behind me, and slipped into the snowy night. Back home, I added the photo to my growing proof folder. The receipts, the statements, the mortgage slips, and now a $4,500 luxury bill from December 14th. Piece by piece, his fortress was crumbling, and he didn't even know it. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because I knew the balance was shifting. He thought Christmas was his, but I was about to give him a gift he'd never forget. Christmas morning arrived with gray skies and a biting wind. The whole city of Cleveland seemed wrapped in joy, kids racing outside with sleds, families crowding around fireplaces. I sat alone at my kitchen table, sipping black coffee, the mortgage bill lying flat in front of me like an invitation, but I wasn't sad anymore. I was steady, focused. The night before, I'd slipped into his study and photographed the $4,500 watch receipt dated December 14th. Now, it sat in my proof folder alongside the mortgage slips, each one a nail in the coffin he was building for himself. But paper alone wasn't enough. I needed backup, witnesses, documents he couldn't wriggle out of. On December 26th, I drove to First National Bank, where I'd done business for over 30 years. My old friend Joe was still there, working the back office. He'd been with me through good times and bad. He even came to my wife's funeral. When I walked in, he shook my hand firmly, his eyes narrowing as he studied my face. "You look like a man with a purpose," he said. "I need your help, Joe," I replied, sliding the mortgage bill across his desk. "I want copies of every payment ISEF made the past 2 years, and I need them signed, stamped, official." Joe leaned back, rubbing his jaw. "That SIP's a tall ask. What SIP's going on?" I met his gaze without blinking. "My son thinks the house is his. He's been telling people ISEP not part of the picture. But these receipts say otherwise." Joe studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "You've always been straight with me. I s'll get you what you need." 2 hours later, I walked out with a folder, copies of every check, every electronic transfer, all bearing the bank's stamp. Dates, amounts, even my signature on several: November 1st, $1,820. October 1st, $1,780. Each document another chain link, tying the house to me. But Joe had slipped something extra into the folder. "You didn't hear it from me," he whispered. "But your son Sep's been moving money. Small transfers into a separate account, in his name only. No joint signatures." I didn't answer right away. My chest tightened, my anger sharpening. "How much?" Joe lowered his voice. "Around $2,200 just last week, right before Christmas." That number lodged in my brain like a bullet. $2,200 gone, funneled quietly while he told me there wasn't room for me at the dinner table. When I got home, I photographed the bank slips and transfers, adding them to the growing proof folder. I could almost see the case building itself, document by document, date by date, like a brick wall closing in on him. Later that week, my daughter-in-law called to thank me for the cookies I'd dropped off. Her voice wavered as she spoke, and I decided to press gently. "Everything all right?" I asked. A pause. Then quietly she said, "He's been telling people the house is already his. That once you've gone, it's all settled." I clenched the phone, forcing myself to keep my tone even. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I shouldn't have said anything, but yes. I thanked her and ended the call, my heart pounding. Confirmation. He wasn't just careless, he was arrogant. He was bragging about a victory he hadn't won yet. That night, I opened my drawer and pulled out the mortgage contract itself, the original papers I'd signed years ago. The language was clear, both names, both signatures required. I traced the ink with my finger, the weight of it settling into my bones. Without me, he had nothing. On December 28th, I met again with Halperin, my lawyer. His office was warm against the winter chill, books lining the walls like silent witnesses. I laid the bank folder on his desk. These, I said, tapping the stamped receipts, prove ISEP carried the payments. And this, I added, holding up the affidavit Joe had quietly signed, confirms my son has been diverting funds into a private account. Halperin adjusted his glasses, reading carefully. Then he looked up at me, his expression grim but impressed. This is airtight. If you want to suspend payments, I can file the notice with the bank tomorrow. I nodded slowly. Do it. The words felt like a hammer striking the final nail. That evening, back home, I lit a fire in the fireplace for the first time all winter. The flames crackled, warming the cold corners of the room. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, set the folder of proof beside me, and stared into the fire. The mortgage payment for January 3rd was about to vanish. Not through anger, not through shouting, but through silence, through absence. He thought I was powerless. He thought I was old, tired, too weak to fight back. But he had no idea how strong a man can become when all he has left is his dignity and a drawer full of receipts. As the flames danced, I whispered into the empty room, "You wanted a Christmas without me. Now you settle get a new year without your house." And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel broken. I felt ready. By December 29th, the city was blanketed in white, every rooftop sagging under the weight of snow. But inside my house, I felt lighter. The decision had been made. The January 3rd payment was suspended, the paperwork filed, and my lawyer had confirmed the bank would move fast. Now all I had to do was wait. The strange thing about revenge is that it doesn't roar. It hums. It's quiet. It's the calm in your chest when you know you're holding all the cards. Each day that passed, I moved through the world with a steady, deliberate patience, while my son had no idea the ground beneath him was crumbling. On the morning of December 30th, I walked into the local diner for breakfast. The place smelled of bacon grease and coffee, familiar and comforting. As I slid into a booth, I overheard two men at the counter whispering, "Did you hear? Hesep's been saying the house is his already." They were talking about my son. Word had spread. His arrogance wasn't just poisoning our family. It was spilling into the neighborhood. People were starting to notice. I sipped my coffee, hiding a smile. By the time the truth came out, the gossip would explode like a match to dry pine. Later that day, I ran into him at the hardware store. He spotted me near the paint aisle, his face tightening before he plastered on a fake smile. "Hey, Dad," he said, too loud as if rehearsed. "Everything good?" I studied him carefully. His eyes darted, his tone carried an edge. He was nervous. "Fine," I said simply, not offering more. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Listen, you Sep's still paying January SEPA's bill, right?" I let the silence stretch, watching the sweat bead at his temple despite the cold outside. Then I smiled faintly. "We sits." His jaw tightened. "Dad, don't play games. You know how important this is." I leaned in just enough for him to hear. "More important to you than to me." Then I walked away, leaving him standing there with his fists clenched. That night, I sat by the fire with the proof folder on my lap. I flipped through the documents slowly. The stamped receipts, the affidavit from Joe, the $4,500 watch slip, the $2,200 transfer. Each piece felt like a loaded weapon, and in just a few days I'd fire them all at once. By December 31st, the tension was thick. My phone rang 3 times that day. My son trying to sound casual, asking if I'd join them for New Year's Eve. I ignored every call. At midnight, I stood at my window watching fireworks burst over Cleveland, their colors reflecting on the snow. Alone, yes, but not defeated. On January 1st, he finally showed up at my house. No warning, just a knock at the door. When I opened it, he stood there in a heavy coat, his face pale. "Dad, can we talk?" he asked. I stepped aside, letting him in. The air between us was heavy, charged. He sat at the table, tapping his fingers. Look, I know we Seth had issues, but the payment Sep's due in 2 days. I just need to know you Seps'll cover it. Just this once more. I folded my hands, staring at him. And then what? You cut me out again? Tell the neighbors I Sip not part of this family? He blinked, startled. What are you talking about? I hear things, I said quietly. I hear you Seth been calling the house yours already, that once I Seth am gone, it's Seth's all yours. He flushed, looking away. People talk. No, I said firmly. You talk. The silence stretched. He finally looked at me, his bravado cracking. Dad, please. If you stop now, we lose everything. I leaned back, feeling the fire behind me warm my shoulders. Then maybe you should set thought of that before you told me there wasn't set a place for me at your table. His mouth opened, then shut. He had no answer. He left soon after, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. I stood there in the quiet, watching the snow fall heavier outside, feeling the weight of years lift off me. January 2nd was calm. Too calm. I spent the day sharpening my plan for what was to come. I placed the folder neatly into my briefcase, alongside the mortgage contract itself. Tomorrow, the house of cards would fall. That night, I didn't lie awake in grief like before. I lay awake in anticipation. The storm was almost here, and I was ready to stand in the center of it. By the morning of January 3rd, the choice would be out of my hands. The payment was canceled. The foreclosure clock would start, and my son's perfect little world would crack wide open. I closed my eyes and whispered, "It's Seth's time." They called it a holiday dinner, a make-up meal, since Christmas had come and gone in a blur of avoidance. January 2nd, early evening. Cleveland sky the color of pewter, the kind of cold that makes doors cling to their frames. I showed up at 6 sharp with a simple pie and a heavy leather briefcase. The pie was for show. The briefcase was for truth. Inside, the house was warm and loud. Kids in socks sliding across hardwood, football murmuring from the den, a candle flickering on the dining table beside a bowl of cinnamon sticks. My daughter-in-law greeted me with a thin smile, the careful kind people wear when they've been told to keep the peace. My son hovered by the kitchen island, a beer in his hand, laughter already too bright. When his eyes met mine, the brightness faltered. "Dad," he said, voice pitched to friendly. "Glad you could make it." "I wouldn't miss the holidays," I answered, setting the pie down and keeping the briefcase in my grip. We gathered at the table, him at the head, like he'd earned the seat. His wife to his right, the kids bouncing until they were told to sit. Plates clinked, steam lifted off the ham. For a minute it almost passed for normal. Then the oven timer dinged and died, leaving a hush that felt like a held breath. I cleared my throat. "Before we eat," I said, "I brought something." My son Sip's jaw twitched. "Dad, maybe we—" I set the briefcase on the tablecloth, unlatched it, and opened the lid like a casket. Inside, a neat stack stamped bank copies, the mortgage contract with both our names, a printed photo of a crumpled store slip, and a signed page with blue ink that would matter more than any of us wanted to admit. I didn't raise my voice. I let the paper do the shouting. "This," I said, sliding out the top sheet, "is November 1st, $1,820. My transfer. Bank stamp, right there. This October 1st, $1,780. My transfer. And this," I tapped the next December 1st, $1,780. My transfer. I laid them side by side like placemats. The kids went still, sensing the air change. My son forced a laugh. "Dad, come on. It's Sep's dinner." "Exactly," I said, meeting his eyes. "A dinner I wasn't expected Sip to attend, but my money has always been expected." He reached for a roll, then thought better of it. "You start being dramatic." I drew out the next page, a 4x6 photo printed from my phone. I slid it toward him. "That Sip's a purchase for $4,500 at Denim Jewelers on December 14th. The slip was on your desk." "Gold watch," I sipped guess. Color climbed his neck. "You were in my house?" "I used my key," I said evenly. "The one you gave me when family still meant something." My daughter-in-law's eyes flashed to him, confusion knitting into worry. 4,500, she whispered. He barked. It's not like that. Then there's this, I said, lifting a single page with a neat blue signature at the bottom. An affidavit from Joe Daniels, First National Bank. It confirms the last 2 years of housing payments were largely mine, and that on December 20th, you moved $2,200 into a personal account, yours only. I tapped the date. 5 days after you told me not to come for Christmas. The room shrank to the space between us. He stared at the page like it might catch fire. Joe had no right. Joe had every right to confirm my payments, I said, and to sign a statement about what he witnessed. My daughter-in-law turned to him, voice very small. You told me we were tight, that we needed every dollar. He looked everywhere but at her. I was going to fix it. I slid the mortgage contract into the center of the table. The paper made a soft, decisive sound. Here sips the part you didn't fix, I said. 2 names. 2 signatures required for any changes, including refinancing. The house stands because I hold it up. Without me, it doesn't stand at all. He drew a breath through his nose, knuckles whitening around his beer. You wouldn't dare. I let the next silence do its work. In the kitchen, the refrigerator motor kicked on and hummed. Somewhere in the den, a commentator said something about a 2-minute drill. It all felt far away. I folded my hands. January 3rd is tomorrow, I said. That mortgage payment. $1,780, one will be paid. ISEF already filed with the bank. The clock starts in the morning. My daughter-in-law covered her mouth. The kids stared at their plates, the kind of stillness children keep when the weather turns inside a room. He leaned forward, voice low. Dad, don't do this. Please. I held his gaze and saw, for the first time, the boy who used to run Hot Wheels across my work boots while I calculated lumber in my head. I saw my wife's eyes in the set of his, and it almost softened me. Almost. You told me, I said quietly, that this was your Christmas now. You told the neighborhood the house is already yours. You used my money, and you lied to your wife. You forgot who built your foundation. He glanced at her, panic blooming. He sips, twisting it. I slid the final page toward the center and tapped the signature that wasn't his. This is the notice from Halperin and Associates. Effective December 30th, my authorization to continue payments was withdrawn. There is nothing to twist. He sagged back, like a man who sips just realized the ground is ice. You want to watch your grandkids lose their home? I turned to the kids and softened my voice. No, I said. I don't want that at all. Then back to him. Which is why you make it right. You apologize to your wife. You correct what you told the neighbors. You arrange your own payments, or the bank will do it for you. My daughter-in-law spoke, shaky but clear. Did you really buy a $4,500 watch? While asking him to cover the bills, he stared at his plate. It was for a bonus. The guys at work. Her chair scraped. The guys at work don't tuck our kids into bed. He pushed back from the table so suddenly his beer tipped, a dark ring spreading on the white cloth. The kids flinched. He stood, chest heaving. You were punishing me because you felt left out of dinner. I stayed seated. I set in drawing a boundary because you made me into a wallet and called it family. And you didn't just leave me out of dinner, you left me out of the truth. The timer on the oven burped again and fell silent. I closed the briefcase with a gentle click. I came tonight so you hear it from me. Not from a letter. Tomorrow the notice lands. If you can cover it, cover it. If you can the bank will set the terms. He lunged for the folder, but I slid it away. These are copies, I said. The originals are with my lawyer. For a moment, he was nothing but fury. Then something broke, maybe pride, maybe denial. He sank back down, staring at the candle flame, trembling in its glass. When he finally spoke, the words were cracked. What do you want? I considered the question, then answered the way I should have months ago. Respect, transparency, and the truth told out loud in this house. He swallowed. I can sell the watch. That's a start, I said. Call the bank tomorrow. Arrange your own payment for January and every month after. Tell your wife where the money went. Tell your neighbors you were wrong. I paused. And tell your kids their grandfather will be welcome at the table when their father remembers how to set it. He stared at me, pride and panic fighting a small war behind his eyes. Then he nodded once. Barely. Okay. My daughter-in-law turned to me, a tear streaking her mascara. Thank you, she whispered, for telling me, for not blindsiding us with a sheriff at the door. I picked up the pie and set it back on the table. An ordinary dessert in an extraordinary moment. I don't said it want blood, I said. Just boundaries. We ate then, in a silence that wasn't empty but honest. The ham had cooled. The rolls went untouched. The kids picked at mashed potatoes and kept peeking at me like I might turn into a judge. When plates were cleared, I stood, latched the briefcase, and slipped my coat on. At the door, my son hovered. He looked smaller than he had an hour ago, less like a man at the head of a table, and more like a boy in a discipline line. Dad, he said, voice rough, if I make it right. You still have your house, because you earned it, I said, not because you stole my name to prop it up. He nodded, eyes shining without tears. Tomorrow? Tomorrow, I agreed. January 3rd. Call by noon. I stepped onto the porch. The night had turned sharper, the cold clean and biting. Across the street, a neighbor dragged their bins to the curb, their breath pluming in the porch light. Behind me, the door clicked closed, and the house exhaled. On the sidewalk, I paused and looked back through the window. I could see my grandchildren chasing each other past the tree. My daughter-in-law stood in the kitchen with the dish towel, looking at my son the way you look at a person you're finally seeing clearly. He leaned against the counter, head down, the bravado drained from him like color from a photograph. I walked to my truck and set the briefcase on the passenger seat. The leather felt warm from the house. I rested my hand on it and let out a breath. I felt like I'd been holding since mid-December. He had tried to make me invisible. He'd made a mistake. The thing about foundations is, you only notice them when they shift. Tomorrow, the bank would send its letter. Whether he learned anything from this dinner would be up to him. Justice isn't always a hammer. Sometimes it's a meal where the truth sits in the center of the table, and no one can pass it by. I turned the key in the ignition and drove into the dark, the briefcase heavy beside me, the road hard and honest under my tires. January 3rd dawned bitter and pale, the kind of Cleveland morning where the sun feels like it can't quite punch through the clouds. I was already up, sipping black coffee at the table, when the phone rang. It was my son. His voice was hoarse, like he hadn't slept. Dad, the bank called. They said the payment didn't go through. I stirred my coffee slowly, letting the silence weigh on him before I answered. That sip's right. It didn't set. You can just walk away like that. His voice cracked into anger. This is my family Sep's home. No, I said, calm as the snow outside. It's Sep's our mortgage, and for 2 years I Sep's carried it. You told me I wasn't Sept welcome at your table. Today you Sept finding out what it means when I Sept not part of your house. He swore under his breath, muttered something about fixing it, then hung up. I didn't call back. By noon, the neighborhood already knew. Word travels fast when pride collapses. A foreclosure notice doesn't land overnight, but rumors do. A neighbor stopped me at the gas station later that day. I heard your boy's house is in trouble, he said softly, like gossip wrapped in sympathy. I shrugged. He should have thought about that before bragging. That evening my daughter-in-law called me directly. Her voice shook, but she wasn't set angry at me. She was angry at him. He never told me about the transfers, or the watch, or that you were still paying most of it. I figured he didn't, I said. Truth has a way of staying quiet until the bills show up. There was silence on the line, then a soft sob. The kids heard us fighting, and staying at my parents' cyst for a while. I closed my eyes, leaning back in my chair. I hated that the little ones were caught in the middle, but I couldn't stop now. This wasn't about punishing them. It was about holding their father accountable. 2 days later, I drove past the house. The Christmas lights were still up, sagging under icicles, but the warmth inside was gone. My son sat slumped in the living room chair, beer bottles scattered on the table, curtains half drawn against the world. The arrogance I'd overheard in the grocery store had drained out of him, leaving something hollow. On January 6th, he showed up at my door. His coat was wrinkled, eyes bloodshot. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "Dad, you win. Just help me fix this before we lose everything." I looked him over, measured the desperation in his voice. "This isn't sept about winning," I said. "It's sept about learning. You wanted me gone. Now you see what that means." His fists clenched at his sides. "You sept rather see your grandkids on the street than pay one more bill?" "No," I said firmly. "I sept rather see their father grow up and face the truth." He stormed off, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the picture frames, but I didn't flinch. The fallout spread wider, the neighbors whispered. His friends at work began asking questions. And my daughter-in-law? She stopped defending him. She told me quietly one afternoon, "I married a man, but lately all I see is a boy." By mid-January, the weight of consequences was crushing him. The bank's first formal notice had landed, stamped and dated. His credit line shrank. The whispers grew louder. The wife he'd taken for granted packed the kids' bags and left him to stew in his empty pride. All because he thought his father's place was at home in the shadows while his money did the talking. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't swing a fist. I didn't even slam a door. I just stepped back and let the silence, the bills, and the truth do the work. And it was working. January 10th arrived with another heavy snowfall, Cleveland buried deeper in white. The cold air stung my lungs as I shoveled my walkway, but inside I felt strangely warm. Justice was moving forward, not with noise or spectacle, but with the quiet certainty of paperwork and deadlines. At 9:15 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was Joe, my banker friend. "It's SEP's official," he said. "The January payment is marked as unpaid. The bank has issued the first foreclosure warning. A letter SIP's going out today." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Thank you, Joe." The next day, January 11th, that letter landed in my son SEP's mailbox. I know because my daughter-in-law called me in tears. "It's SEP's real," she said, voice shaking. "A foreclosure notice. I can SEP believe it. SEP's come to this." "It came to this," I answered gently. The moment he decided my money mattered more than my presence. On January 13th, I spotted him at the grocery store. No cocky laugh this time. He stood in line with a half-empty basket, wearing the same coat from the dinner, his hair unkempt. When he saw me, his eyes dropped to the floor. He didn't speak. He couldn't. By January 15th, the neighbors knew the full story. One of them stopped me outside church, leaning close. "He told us the house was already his," she whispered. "Now look." I just smiled faintly. Houses stand on truth, not lies. The collapse came faster than even I expected. On January 18th, my daughter-in-law moved in with her parents for good. She left him a note, slipped under his beer bottle on the coffee table. Later she showed it to me. It read, "I won't raise our children in a house built on lies." That same week he called me. His voice was ragged, stripped of arrogance. "Dad, I can fix this. The bank wants nearly 5,000 by February, and I don't have it." I let the silence hang for a long time before I said, "Now you understand what it means to carry weight you never earned." He sobbed quietly, trying to muffle it. "Please, just one more time, cover it for me." I closed my eyes, remembering the day he told me not to come for Christmas, the words still sharp. "Is SEP's really our Christmas now?" "No," I said. "You made sure I wasn't set at your table. Now you sit'll learn what it feels like when I sit'm not at your house." He hung up, broken. On January 22nd, Halperin, my lawyer, called me with an update. "The foreclosure is progressing. Unless your son makes full restitution, his set will be served by the end of the month." "Then it's SEP's done," I said. But the final blow wasn't from the bank. It came in whispers, in looks, in the loss of reputation that no dollar could fix. His coworkers pulled back. His friends stopped dropping by. He became the man everyone pointed at quietly. the one who couldn't keep his own house afloat. By January 25th, he drove past my house and parked across the street. I watched him through the curtain. He sat in his car for nearly half an hour, headlights cutting through the snow, before finally pulling away. He didn't knock, he didn't call, he just sat there, knowing I had the receipts, the truth, and the strength he thought was gone. Justice didn't arrive in a courtroom. Not yet. It arrived in the form of a thin envelope with a foreclosure stamp, in the silence of his empty house, in the way the world looked at him differently once the truth was known. And for me, justice came in the stillness, in the knowledge that I hadn't screamed or begged. I hadn't stooped to cruelty. I had simply stepped back, and the world revealed what was already true without me. His house couldn't stand. On January 28th, I stood at my window as the mailman trudged up the walk, a certified letter in his hand. Across town, my son was receiving the same, the official foreclosure papers. The end of the line. I whispered to myself, "You didn't instant lose me, you gave me away. And now you Stev lost everything." By the time February rolled in, Cleveland's snow was gray at the edges, piled high from weeks of storms. The world outside looked worn and tired, but inside my house I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. I sat by the fire most evenings, the proof folder tucked back into my desk where it belonged. The flames cracked softly, and beside me on the mantel, my wife's photo watched over it all. She'd always believed that truth had a way of surfacing. She would have understood what I'd done. Sometimes I'd think back to Christmases past, the stockings she embroidered, the laughter in the kitchen, the smell of gingerbread, and then to this Christmas, the one where my own son told me there wasn't room for me. That wound will never fully heal, but it taught me something. It showed me that loyalty without respect is just slavery in a nicer suit. I didn't take his house with a hammer. I didn't shout at him in front of the neighbors. I simply removed myself. I let the foundation shift on its own, and when it crumbled, the sound it made was enough to wake everyone around him. On quiet nights, I have to pour myself a glass of whiskey and whisper to my wife Sip's picture, "We built this house together." He forgot who held the foundation, but I reminded him. The truth is, revenge doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it comes with paperwork, silence, and patience. Sometimes the loudest justice is the absence of the man you thought you could step on forever. Neighbors still whisper, but now it's not about me. It's about him. The son who bragged too soon, who thought inheritance was guaranteed, who learned the hard way that nothing stands without respect. And I learned something too, that boundaries aren't cruelty. They're survival. They're the line between being a father and being a fool. One evening, as the fire died low and the snow tapped against the window, I wrote a single line in my journal, a line I wanted to leave behind, the kind of truth you can pass down even when pride gets in the way. You didn't lose me, you gave me away. And now, you Stev lost everything. I closed the book, set it on the mantel beside her photo, and finally let myself rest. February faded into March, and with it came the slow melt of Cleveland's snow. The sidewalks cleared, the icicles dripped, and the city began to breathe again. But for my son, the thaw didn't bring relief. It only revealed the cracks. By mid-March, the foreclosure process was in full swing. The bank gave him deadlines, numbers he couldn't meet. $4,800 in arrears, plus fees, plus penalties. He tried calling me twice, his voice hoarse on the voicemails. "Dad, please, I can hold it together. Just help me this once." I never called back. By April, the for sale sign went up in his yard. It wasn't the kind of proud sign you plant after moving up in the world. It was the desperate kind, the one that says time has run out. Neighbors slowed their cars when they passed, shaking their heads. Some pitied him, most didn't. He moved into a rental across town, smaller, darker, stripped of the pride he once wore like armor. His wife stayed with her parents for a while, and though she eventually allowed him to see the kids on weekends, the marriage was cracked down the middle. And me? I didn't gloat. I didn't strut around with proof in my pocket. Instead, I found purpose. One afternoon, I walked into the local shelter downtown. the one that helps struggling families keep a roof over their heads. I wrote a check, not for the whole world, just enough to cover 2 months' rent for a family of 4. The woman at the desk asked if I wanted my name on the board of donors. I shook my head. No need, just make sure they stay warm. Because that's the difference between justice and cruelty. Justice sets boundaries and teaches lessons. Cruelty kicks a man while he's already down. I didn't need cruelty, I had my peace. Still, every now and then I'd drive past his old house, the one with the sagging lights still on the porch, waiting for someone new to claim it. I'd park for a moment, engine idling, and remind myself of the truth. It wasn't about the bricks or the beams. It was about respect. He tried to erase me, to take my place at the table while keeping my money in his pocket. But in the end, he learned what I'd always known. A house isn't a home without honesty. The aftermath wasn't fireworks or shouting. It was quiet. It was the steady sound of consequences marching in step, one day after the next, until the lesson sank deep. And when I finally walked away, it wasn't with bitterness. It was with the calm of a man who knows he drew the line where it had to be drawn. December came around again. Almost exactly a year after that phone call when my son told me I wasn't welcome at his table. Cleveland was blanketed in snow once more. The streets salted, the rooftops frosted white. People hung their lights. The smell of pine and cinnamon drifted through the city, and every store was crowded with families buying gifts. I didn't bother with decorations that year. My little house was quiet, the mantel bare except for my wife's photo and the journal where I'd written down my truth. I kept the fire going, poured myself a simple glass of whiskey, and let the days pass without ceremony. Then, a week before Christmas, the mail came. A thick stack of envelopes, bills, flyers, the usual junk. But one stood out, cream-colored, addressed in my son's handwriting. I held it for a long moment, the ink smudged slightly, as if written in haste. I slid it open with a knife. Inside was a Christmas card. No glossy photo of the family, no pre-printed greeting, just a single line written in shaky pen. Dad, I wasn't expecting you last year, but I could use you this one. I sat at the table, staring at the words. The room was silent except for the crackle of the fire. He hadn't said, I miss you. He hadn't said, I'm sorry. He'd said he could use me. The same word he'd lived by for years, use. I turned the card over in my hands, studied it, waited for some swell of emotion, anger maybe, or forgiveness. But all I felt was clarity. I slid the card back into its envelope, sealed it shut again with a press of my thumb, and set it in the drawer beside the old mortgage receipts, unopened, unread beyond that single line. Because the truth was simple. I wasn't a tool to be picked up when convenient. I wasn't a wallet, or a safety net, or a piece of furniture to move in and out of the picture. I was a man who had drawn a line, and I wasn't crossing it again. That Christmas, I cooked myself a small dinner, roast chicken, potatoes, a bottle of red wine. I set the table for one and ate slowly, savoring the quiet. Outside, children's laughter rang through the snowy streets. Families gathered, but I didn't feel alone. I felt free. When the fire had burned low and the wineglass was empty, I opened my journal and wrote one final line beneath the one from last year. He asked if he could use me again, but I bet him no longer his to use. I closed the book, turned off the lights, and let the quiet of the season wrap around me like a blanket. The irony wasn't lost on me. A year ago, I was excluded from his table. A year later, he wanted me back, not as family, but as leverage. And by refusing, I gave myself the only gift that mattered, dignity. I whispered into the stillness, the same way I sipped had whispered a year before, not this time. And with that, the story was finished.